that the meaning of life is constant growth, a continual process of self-development both for individuals and for companies, and that there is a scientific methodology for this, that it doesn't just fall from the sky or happen by chance, but that you can actually take it into your own hands. First of all, we don't really have this openness to technology, that sense of looking forward to new technologies, because, it's another opportunity for growth. We tend to reject technologies instead. But at the same time, that's actually the opportunity Germany has, because these technological developments aren't going to stop. So human work and also human leadership will focus on what people do best, namely being human.
Dear viewers and listeners, welcome to a new episode of Digital.Decoded, our podcast. This time, once again, with a guest, with Sven Gábor Jánszky. Sven, I warmly welcome you, and I think it's really great that you agreed to join Mario and me for a discussion today. And you are, Sven, one of the most well-known German futurists, and among other things, you are also the managing director of the think tank To Be Ahead, making you the head of Europe's leading independent institute for future research. And for years, you have been supporting companies with studies, trend analyses, and inspiring lectures. I've already seen many of your talks on YouTube. And always, and that's what excites me, is your perspective on how we will live, work, and especially lead in the future. In our podcast, among other things, we talk about leadership, AI, and about sales and distribution. And what you're bringing to the podcast today, Sven, is that you've just returned from the USA and China, where you discussed artificial intelligence with leading think tanks. And you're bringing these insights into AI strategy with you today. And that's what we'll be discussing. But first, Sven, let's talk about you. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself? What describes you best as a person?
Yes, with pleasure. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. What describes me as a person? I've learned in my life that no matter what situation you're in, if you look to the future, 5 years, 10 years ahead, you always see yourself in a better situation. That means that each of us, and this applies to both individuals and companies, has what we call a future self, or actually probably even 10 different better versions of our future selves ahead of us. And if you want to take advantage of that, if you want to grow as a person or as a company, then there is a scientific methodology for it, which my colleagues and I here at the Institute, so to speak, offer to others, and we accompany them and so on. So in short, that the meaning of life is constant growth, constant development, both for individuals and for companies. And that there is a scientific method for this, that it doesn't just fall from the sky or happen by chance, but that you can take it into your own hands and do it according to a very clear scientific roadmap. This shapes all of me, all of my life and my work.
Awesome, Sven. What excites me especially is these different future selves you describe, or the better versions of our future selves. That's a very positive outlook on the future and a very positive view of us as human beings. And now we will certainly talk more about the future. We will definitely talk about the role we humans play there. But now, of course, I've been following you on LinkedIn, Sven, and you just got back from China. I saw a lot of posts. Before that, you were in the US and spoke with leading think tanks and various companies. And what impressions, what projects, what approaches, especially around AI, impressed or surprised you the most there?
Well, what I find impressive is the speed of implementation, especially in China. Yes, of course, everyone knows Silicon Valley, and we've kind of gotten used to that pace, but the speed in China is on a whole different level. It's significantly faster. What is completely normal in China, so to speak, is that you just book a robo-taxi, like in Shenzhen, where I was, in the city. You just have an app, you book a taxi, and then a robo-taxi pulls up, and there's no driver inside because it drives itself. You ride through the city, through the traffic jams, and it's just a normal, boring taxi ride, but it's in regular operation for everyone, Or if you look at companies, as we always do, of course, then you'll find there are about 50 to 60 companies working on humanoid robots. So robots that look like human hands and feet, basically an AI with a robot built around it, and they're already selling these to other companies as if it's the most natural thing in the world. Some say we've sold 10,000, while others claim by the end of the year we'll have sold 100,000. So in short, this isn't really surprising for us as futurists, because we've been predicting this for 10 years already. So it's not surprising that this exists. But how quickly it's becoming part of everyday life, something that hasn't happened yet in Germany, is remarkable. In Germany, most people still think of this as science fiction. But over there, it's completely normal. That really is always quite impressive.
I have a question for you, dear Sven. I've been to China myself several times, and I also noticed, so for example, I was in Shanghai, Beijing, but also in Shenzhen. And what you notice, of course, is on the one hand an openness, but on the other hand, you can also achieve a completely different pace of innovation because it's driven by the state, right? And of course, there aren't just positive sides, there are also downsides, but we don't want to talk about those today. We want to talk about the possibilities of AI. But do you see it that way too? That would be my specific question now. Compared to America, do you see this as a real growth driver in China because it's also so strongly driven by the state?
Yes, absolutely. So regarding this state, and let me be perfectly clear on this point, for fundamental reasons related to democratic theory, I am certainly not a fan of China's system, okay? But what you simply have to acknowledge is the fact that this particular way of having a centralized plan, yes, it is true, they have these incredibly long-term 30-year plans, more medium-term 10-year plans, and of course the more common 5-year plans. And this isn't just wishful thinking or anything like that, but rather it's all clearly based on technological forecasts, very clearly on how can we, the central goal of this government is, so to speak, to double the average household income and so on. So how can we get the most or the best possible out of technology? And what they do then is they make a plan and then basically set the different regions in competition with each other. So there's this, I've really studied this very intensively now or looked into it. Within this state apparatus, so to speak, the people who rise quickly are those who achieve the greatest successes in certain regions, cities, and so on. That means there's an incredible amount of competition there. It's not that there's no competition there, but there's an intense competition between these regions, between these cities. Why? Because the best leader, so to speak, then somehow moves up a level. And through this competition, they have a genuine dynamism, of course, and they also have money, obviously, yes. And that's a big difference. That leads to a much, much faster pace than what we have here in Germany, for example.
Yes. Now it's like this, Sven. In recent years, we've seen a very strong technological dominance from Silicon Valley, from the USA. So all the major internet corporations, cloud technology companies, and so on, mostly come from the USA, and of course also dominate the technology and IT in companies. And what you're describing right now, and what you also see in the media, is an incredible speed in implementation, but also a high pace of innovation, right, with this competition you just mentioned. And now let's take a look at Germany, and I'd like to throw out the following thesis and hear your opinion. We've kind of slept through digitalization in Germany, maybe you could even say in Europe as a whole. And right now we're learning from China how an incredible pace of innovation can develop while we're once again lagging behind in Europe. Do you see it the same way?
I see it the same way, yes. Yes. So the foundation, and this isn't anything new for a futurist, it's actually the basis of our forecasts as well. When we look at technological developments, and technological developments are by far the strongest driver of long-term, even societal changes and so on. Technological developments always follow this kind of S-curve. So it starts off slowly, then it takes off, then it rises quickly, and at the top it reaches a plateau again. That's the case with every technology. And what the Chinese and of course the Americans do very, very deliberately and professionally is that they each look at what the next technology is that is about to reach this takeoff point, so to speak. And that's exactly where they go in very deliberately and with focus, with money, energy, and so on and so forth. They invest right there. So also at the state level, right, a very focused energy technology policy, that's what I would call it. And then the technologies that reach the plateau at the top, they also shut them down radically. Yes, for example, the combustion engine. I mean, here in Germany, we still have it. Yes, it's just reached the plateau. There's no point in beating around the bush about that. And here in Germany, we're trying to somehow hold on to this combustion engine. And there in Shenzhen, a perfect example, the city, so basically the government just said, there isn't a single taxi left in our city with a combustion engine. We don't have a single motor scooter left, not a single bus. So everything that's state-run is all electric, yes. Not literally overnight, but within 6 months, the taxi companies there were given instructions. In 6 months, you need to be electric, otherwise you won't be allowed to operate anymore. So it's a very, very targeted strategy, and that's something we don't have in Germany. First of all, we don't really have this openness to technology, this excitement for new technologies, because we know that's another opportunity for growth. We tend to reject technologies instead. Think about nuclear power. genetic engineering. There are thousands of examples. But at the same time, that's actually the opportunity Germany has, because these technological developments aren't going to stop.
Yeah, okay.
So if we decided today, yes, we want to change, we want to be open to technology, then soon there will be quantum computers, then soon there will be BCIs, that is brain-computer interfaces. Yes, there are incredibly brilliant technologies all still down there, all still waiting for their breakthrough. You could absolutely dive into that. You could focus on it. You always, 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 always have that opportunity. You just have to take it into your own hands at some point.
Yeah, and that's what's so exciting, Sven. I mean, in Germany, especially with new technologies and new research, we were always strong leaders, but we've also had a lot of brain drain to America and also to China. And I find it exciting that you say we also have a huge opportunity there. I'd like to come back to a point I once read from you. You said that 2025 will be the year of AI agents. And now we ourselves as Digital are also active in this field. And we're also getting more and more requests from clients for multi-agents, meaning chaining agents that can call each other and, of course, handle routine tasks. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that again. Why did you say it like that? I hope I understood you correctly. And what's the background to that? Why do you assess it that way?
So let me start with the background. The background is that AI development in the world, that is for companies, yes, let's make it concrete for companies. I think I would describe 5 steps in which this takes place. The first step is, this is where we all come from, not using any AI yet. All processes are still manual, maybe a bit with computers and so on. Okay, so that's where we come from. So the second step is we've realized that AI exists. We've already done a bit of testing, so we've already played around with it a little, so to speak. Yes, that's what a lot of us have done, either in our private lives or at work. But actually, we haven't achieved any real results yet. In terms of the company, no measurable results like cost reduction, increased revenue, or anything like that. That hasn't happened yet. Basically, we've just wasted money and time so far. The third step is I've made it clear for a company, I've clarified this and that is my process chain. So this process has this part and that part and that part and that part. And in this and that part, I can now use an AI tool to be faster there, to get more output and so on. That's actually the third phase. Most of the companies that I get to know and work with are typically either in this second phase, meaning they have certainly experimented a little bit, but in reality, nothing more has come of it. Or, on the other hand, they're in this more advanced third phase and have already made some very noticeable and genuinely measurable improvements. But that's not the end of the line. The fourth level, the most advanced stage, is where you don't just partially replace existing human processes with tools. Instead, you completely hand over the entire operational process, the entire process chain from start to finish to artificial intelligence. And that's not just a tool, that's not just one AI, but rather you have these so-called agents or multi-agent systems. So these are then several AIs, so to speak, connected in sequence. Let me give a simple example so that everyone who's listening to us right now can understand. So you have a question or you have a task for an AI. It's supposed to do that. Okay. Now you feed it in there. Now comes the first AI, the first specialized AI, which is trained to understand your question or your task. If it doesn't understand, it will ask follow-up questions and you have to answer them a bit more. And once it has understood, it breaks it down into sub-questions, that is, into subtasks that need to be completed in order to fulfill the main task. This first AI does nothing else but exactly that. Then it passes these sub-questions onto a second AI. This second AI is usually called the orchestrator in such multi-agent systems. If it were a human, we would call it the project manager. This second AI knows hundreds, maybe thousands of other specialized AIs, knows what the others can do, that is, what their specialties are, what they cost, and so on. That means this orchestrator then assigns these small subtasks to specialized AIs and waits for them to come back. And when they come back, this orchestrator checks whether the sum of the partial answers really provides an answer to my main question. And then it's passed on again to another specialized AI, the so-called inspector. And this inspector checks whether throughout this whole process and in the result, the regulations were followed, the rules, compliance, and so on and so forth. If not, then the whole thing starts over from the beginning. If yes, the output is given to the human. So what I just described in hopefully understandable, simple words is the collaboration of, let's say, 10 to 15 individual AIs, individual agents for a single question, right? That's basically the fourth level. And the human, well, their role then changes. It's no longer the case that the human does the job and the AI assists. Instead, the AI does the job and the human assists. The human then ensures that the quality is at the right level or improves it further, and so on. And the fifth and final level is then the stage of, well, what we call an AI DNA, meaning a company that is built entirely and fundamentally around artificial intelligence. Sometimes you read in the newspaper that there are already the first companies consisting of just one person and everything else is done by AI. There are still very few of them in the world and only in very, very small niches, so to speak. But they do exist already. So, and back to your question, why is 2025 the year of AI agents? Because this transition from phase 3 to phase 4 is happening right now among the pioneers, those who are really, really, how should I put it, those who are active, who are progressive, who want to get the most benefit out of it, they are making this transition from phase 3 to 4 right now. Why are they doing it in 2025? Because it's possible now, yes. Because the technology has emerged, because there are now platforms, several in fact, where on a single platform, so you don't have to program all these AI agents yourself. Instead, on one platform, you have, I don't know, over 60,000 such AI agents available. You just enter what you want, and then the system puts together your AI agents for you, so to speak, yeah? That's the reason why 2025 is really the year of AI agents for the pioneers, and everyone else who comes after, well, they'll do it in 2026 or 2027, or maybe not until 2028.
How do you assess that? If I may ask a follow-up question, you just mentioned the example, the first company, I'll put it this way, single man shows, building everything around themselves. Now, it's usually the case, medium-sized companies, let's stick with good old German Mittelstand, they have quite a few employees.
Do you think they'll have an easier time because they'll gradually see the added value? Or do you think it will rather, let's say, lead to the extinction of these companies as well, because of course other players are entering the market who can use these AI capabilities in a completely different way and aren't so traditional?
Yes, well, I think that both will happen. I think that, well, with my clients, we also, of course, support companies through all of this and develop strategies for them. And I know companies that are really small to medium-sized businesses now, like 25 people. There's one that always comes to mind, FPZ GmbH, that's what they're called. They're based in Cologne, 25 employees. They've been on the market for 30 years in the healthcare sector, dealing with back pain and such. And they have a pretty innovative boss. And by now he has 62 of these AI agents working together in operation. And he was at, well, I can talk about him because he was at our Future Congress earlier this year and he shared the same story there. In the first half of this year, he gained 5 times as many customers as in the entire previous year. Yes. Thanks to this AI, simply because they can do more, and at a high level of quality. So, long story short, for those German companies, including small and medium-sized businesses who are just starting out, who are putting together their first plan, taking the first 1, 2, 3 steps, and then after 4 weeks or at the latest 8 weeks realize, hey, I'm getting more customers, I'm making more sales, and so on. They are the ones who, first of all, understand how it works and also grasp the purpose, and they just keep moving forward. And they, how should I put it, they naturally outperform the others, yes? And the others who don't do this, who just wait around or think that the government will eventually sort things out with some kind of funding programs, well, they're going to die out. That's just how it is. The development is moving so fast that at some point they won't stand a chance anymore.
Yes, I completely agree with you on that point, Sven. And when you talk like this, it really gives you courage and motivation, and it also restores confidence that a lot can happen in companies in Germany. But as you said, a lot has to happen too, right? You have to have this capacity for innovation and also the courage. So just now you explained using the example of this one company. There are numerous agents here, and of course this will change the company. Probably the employees will also change, or rather they will have to change. Maybe the managers will have to change as well. And in your book, you described in great detail how technology and people will have to work together in the future, or let's say must work together. So what is your perspective on how people need to change, both in the role of employee, but also in the role of manager?
Yes, that's really interesting because just to make it clear, when we talk about the future, we're talking about, let's say, the next 5 years, let's say 2030. Then we're talking about a time when there will be significantly more AI agents than there are people. So billions of them worldwide, yes? Every single person, well, maybe not everyone, depending on whether you want to or not, but anyone actively participating in life will have several of them, right? And that also means that the majority of communication The conversations that take place in companies or in the world or society will no longer be between humans and humans, nor, as many people think today, between humans and AI, but rather will function between AI and AI. I think very few people have realized that. Most people, even most of those who work with AI, somehow think we're preparing for a world where humans talk a lot with AI, and that humans will then guide this AI. No, that's not the future. The future is AI talks to AI. AI guides itself. And what is the role of humans? The role of humans, human leadership, is that you have, let's imagine like this Frank Schifferdecker up there with his FPZ GmbH. I now have 62 AI agents in use here doing something together. So what do I do as a human? What I do as a human is, first of all, to set the whole thing up, to provide the rules so that they don't do anything wrong and so on. I monitor them the whole time. So I look at which parts are working well and at which points, I don't know, where things aren't working somehow, where something breaks down, and then I optimize it, so to speak. So actually I'm a sort of, if you want to put it harshly, an assistant to the machine, or maybe a supervisor, a quality manager, so to speak, for this machine. And everywhere that people, so in any situation or environment where actual, real, genuine human contact comes into play, that's exactly where I personally step in. So I get involved and talk to other people, for example, in the sales process or something like that, when it really comes down to closing a deal or something similar. So maybe I want to, this is a huge, complex and multifaceted question. You could write entire books about it, which I have actually done, but maybe I want to break it down into two things, or perhaps two main aspects, to make it a bit more manageable and easier to discuss in detail. First of all, we need to get used to the fact that it's not human work, manual or verbal work, that is at the center and being assisted, but rather that it's the other way around. AI is at the center and humans assist it. That's very important. And the second thing is, we humans, over time, no longer, how should I put this, the possibility that the output of human work in terms of quantity and quality is better than what these AI agents can achieve, that possibility no longer exists. It simply won't be there anymore. That's why it makes no sense at all for me to try to compete with such a computer or such an AI. That's nonsense. People will do what they, so human work and also human leadership will focus on what people do best, namely people themselves. Being together with other people, giving others energy, giving others motivation, passion, and so on and so forth. That's what we're really good at. And honestly, I think that, well, of course, you can discuss this from different perspectives, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually feel better as a person when my focus is on helping other people grow to reach their full potential. Rather than somehow trying to personally beat an AI at something, that's just not how I see myself.
I find that interesting, Sven, because, for example, we work a lot with Paloa, with voice AI agents that we also create ourselves. And the credo there is that AI talks to AI, but via voice. And I think that's a really fascinating statement. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that. That basically these classic interfaces will disappear like we still have today, API interfaces and this and that in the future, AI will communicate with other AI via voice, and that new interfaces will emerge from that as well. And personally, I believe that's exactly what will happen. And I find your thesis extremely exciting, that we, I'll call it assisting for now, but that we might also be the drivers of innovation, constantly bringing in new ideas. What exactly can such an AI do? And personally, I like AI because it simply takes routine tasks off my plate. Things I still have to do today, but they're just time wasters. So it's not really something I enjoy doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly right. That's exactly right, yes. And I mean, there are going to be a lot of, how should I put it? Of course, the topic of interfaces is a really interesting one, because naturally the question arises, in what language do these things actually communicate with each other? And then there definitely won't be just one answer. So there will be plenty of use cases where it makes sense, where people will insist that it works in human language. And then, of course, there are other use cases where people no longer want to look at it themselves. So the systems can just communicate in some kind of machine language or whatever else. So I think, for me personally, the central perspective is simply that we actually have to prepare, in fact, for a world where humans are no longer at the center of communication and conversation, but rather such a system is. And for that, In the coming months and years, the appropriate tools, interfaces, and so on will be created.
Yes, great. So Sven, from my point of view, we could really continue this discussion for hours. I find it super exciting, super interesting to hear your insights, especially about the combination, the role of technology and AI in the future, and the role of humans in the future. Maybe to wrap things up, I'd like to ask you one more question, Sven. If you had one wish for politics, for education, for business, what would it take for this spirit of innovation to arise in Germany so that we can get ahead of the curve again and maybe actively help shape the future? What's your perspective on that? What would your wish be?
Well, I think maybe I can have two wishes. There are actually a lot at this point. So first, what makes a huge difference between what has happened in Germany, China, the USA, and so on is a vision for the future. And of course, as a futurist, I always wish for visions of the future because that's basically the result of our work, naturally. But especially in China, yes, let me mention this. China will celebrate the country's 100th anniversary in 2049. So that's the country's centennial. In other words, they were founded 100 years ago. By the way, Germany too, in the same year. The Federal Republic was founded in the same year. What about the Chinese? They have a very clear plan for what things should look like, the country, the various industries, and so on their 100th anniversary. Now just try asking any of the German parties about the 100th anniversary of the Federal Republic and what the country will look like then. No idea. No one has any kind of plan, and not a single person has ever even considered this question. And that's typical. That's typical of our society, but also typical for companies. With companies, at least many of them, not all, but many at least have something like a 5-year plan or something similar. But I also hear from a lot of people right now, people saying the world has become so fast, so agile, and everything is just moving so quickly. Making plans doesn't make any sense anymore. By the way, I want to point out that that's actually the single biggest misunderstanding, as well as the most convenient and frankly overused excuse you can possibly have as a manager, namely to avoid having to actually deal with the reality of where things are truly, genuinely headed, and instead just react, often impulsively, to whatever is currently happening in the moment, and then supposedly call that being agile, as if that alone is a virtue. So, that's completely the wrong approach, in my opinion. I think Germany in the past used to be known as the land of poets and thinkers, and also the land of planners and engineers and so on, people who valued careful preparation and thoughtful design. If we could somehow return to that tradition, that would honestly be my very first wish, that we as a society have plans again, that we embrace planning, foresight, and a sense of direction, rather than just reacting to circumstances as they arise. And these plans, well, that we actually pursue them and execute them with discipline, that would be really nice. That's one thing. The second thing is, as you notice both in Silicon Valley and in China, this development, this speed we're talking about, is driven by something that people can't even imagine. Usually, if you ask someone, even a professor or someone who's thought about it, what's special about Silicon Valley? Then they'll tell you, well, there are truly great universities there with very smart and talented people. There's a lot of money, and then there are the big influential companies that buy up the promising startups and so on. But what really drives this development, almost no one pays attention to that. I hardly ever meet anyone who does. The real driving force behind this development is people who have come to Silicon Valley from all over the world. They started calling out to the whole world 40 years ago. All the crazy people of the world, come here. Here you can give your family a better life. Why? Because when you come here, you don't just work 8 hours a day, you work more than that. You work really hard, you connect yourself and your life with a rapidly growing technology, semiconductor technology in Silicon Valley, and then you earn a lot of money and your children have a better life. So, in short, it's populated. You hardly meet anyone in Silicon Valley who was actually born there. It's populated by people who had a tough life back home, who went there, worked really hard, and used this technology so that their children could have a better life. You see the same phenomenon in Shenzhen. Shenzhen is an incredibly fast-growing city. In 45 years, somehow 30 million people. It's crazy, yeah. They don't just fall from the sky, they're all basically immigrants from Chinese villages who had a tough life back home, who go there and do exactly the same thing as the people in Silicon Valley, just not there. Not with semiconductor technology, but rather with AI and genetics and other modern technologies. And you know what's crazy? Exactly the same thing. So I would say, give people who are struggling the chance through technology to level up themselves and their families. That's exactly what our grandparents did after the war. The technology they used back then was called the combustion engine, and that's what led to the economic miracle, what we now call the economic miracle. So basically, our grandparents invented it, and then in our parents' generation or whenever, that idea got lost and was somehow replaced by the thought, well, why should our children have it even better? We're already doing well. It's enough if they do just as well as we do. And that's so 80s, 90s, last century. And that was exactly the moment when Silicon Valley first started to catch up with us. Well said. My second wish, if I may make a wish, is that we rediscover our hunger for growth. That we give people who also exist in Germany and who are not doing well. We see this in elections where they vote for, from a democratic perspective, the wrong parties, whether left or right, and there are quite a lot of them, that we give them the opportunity to support themselves and their current situation, their families, through the use of technology. To basically take things to the next level. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look to the left and right around the world and learn from others. We can also look back at our own history, at our grandparents, and learn from them. We just need to start doing it again.
Sven, that's a fantastic closing statement. At this point, I want to sincerely thank you for these truly fascinating and wonderful insights and for your perspective on the future. You say engage with the future, and furthermore, you say be hungry for innovation, for success, for the future. And I think those are truly great closing words. And above all, one thing you said really resonates and harmonizes with me. People remain human, and that is exactly the strength of humanity, namely people themselves, and not analytical ability and not communication in the sense of communicating with other people when it really comes down to understanding the details, etc. That's where technology can help. And I think the future you describe really makes you excited for what's to come. And so, dear Sven, dear Mario, all that's left for us to say to our viewers and listeners is stay human.
Stay human. Thank you very much, Sven. That was a great impulse.
And have a great future. See you soon.